Well, in one way there's a very simple link between economic growth and transparency, and it goes like this. You can't really have good economic growth unless you've got good fiscal management in the country, and you can't have good fiscal management unless you know what your fiscal performance and your fiscal position is. In other words, you need good numbers in order to manage your finances well. So in that sense, I think it's a very simple relationship. If you don't have good numbers, it's very hard to manage something, and that's the same whether it's management of an economy or management of a company. So there's that very direct link. And maybe I could refer also to a book that's been published recently called The Reckoning by Jacob Soll, and he talks about, over a very long time frame, the relationship between the success of countries and the quality of accounting, in particular by the governments in those countries. And what he identifies is that where countries' governments account well, that's conducive to trust between the people and the governments, and that level of trust enables people to feel more relaxed, for example, about paying their taxes. They know the taxes will be, well used, the government won't be wasting the money, and there won't be significant levels of corruption in the government. So the point that Soll makes is that over a long period of time you can see a relationship between the quality of accounting and the level of economic growth, the success of countries. So two different ways of looking at it. And in the World Congress, at least in the session that I'll be participating in on public sector financial management, we can also look at specific examples of countries that manage their finances well and have been successful, and countries that manage their finances badly, have bad information, and have suffered as a result. Well, the Greece example is a really interesting one, because it was the Greek numbers and the realisation by markets that those numbers were really seriously unreliable that triggered the sovereign debt crisis, and we saw subsequently the significant impact that had on Europe as a whole, in fact on the global economy, but particularly on Greece, and the consequences for Greece were really very, very bad indeed. What's interesting about that in some ways is that as an illustration of the difference between, so to speak, good numbers and bad numbers, the debt to GDP ratio that's commonly cited for Greece by credit rating agencies under the Maastricht arrangements is 175%. So debt to GDP is 175%. But the way that's measured is not according to international accounting standards. And if you used an international accounting standards measure under international public sector accounting standards or under international financial reporting standards, for example, the number would be significantly under 60%, not 175%. And the consequences of that for the Greek economy are really significant. I mean, that if markets saw the level of debt at 60%, not 175%, then the implications are that people will be more willing to invest in Greece. They'll invest at a lower cost of capital to Greece. It means that Greek businesses will be able to borrow at more favourable interest rates. At the moment they're paying a significant penalty above their European competitors, and that would have really significant benefits and very rapid benefits to the Greek economy. So having good numbers is critical to economic decision making. I'll do that in my presentation, and the example I'll use is New Zealand, where there is really a very high level of transparency, and there has been a high level of transparency now for the best part of 25 years, and it's transparency to the extent, for example, that the New Zealand government produces accrual-based financial statements on a monthly basis, so that if there is an economic decision which the government takes, then the economic consequences of that, or the fiscal consequences of that, will be reported within about 2 months. So the monthly statements are produced within about a month end. And what we've seen as a result in New Zealand is a really good control of the government's fiscal position over an extended period. So the government, for example, was able to run a surplus every year from 1994, when the system really was fully in place, through until the global financial crisis in 2008. And New Zealand then took a big hit, as many other countries did in the financial crisis, and also had a couple of earthquakes. But already for a couple of years, the New Zealand economy is largely back on track. The government is showing surpluses again. It did in 2013, has again in 2014. It was the first country in the developed world to raise interest rates. So the economy generally is just managed a whole lot better and a whole lot more tightly because of the availability to the government of really good numbers. Well, around the globe, I think the answer is adoption of international public sector accounting standards. That's a set of standards that it's based on the International Financial Reporting Standards, but it's adapted for government, so they apply specifically to governments. And if governments adopt an international set of standards, then you're in a position to compare one government with another government, and that's really important. And secondly, it means that the individual government isn't in a position to decide for itself how it wants to report, which, I mean, to put it in its most stark form, it would be like letting the directors of Enron decide what form of reporting they wanted to adopt. Now, you wouldn't do that, and government shouldn't, in a way, choose their own reporting standards in order to meet their own needs. So the adoption of international public sector accounting standards really is the answer, and we do see that. There's a very significant number of countries globally that are in the process of moving to adopt international public sector accounting standards. I mean, the number that's commonly cited is something around 80 or more countries that are moving in that direction. And when we contrast that with, there was a recent report from the IMF, 2012 report, which suggested that at that point in time, there were only 14 countries that could give them a balance sheet, that is, with a complete set of assets and liabilities. And 14 countries is not many, and many of those countries had qualified audit opinions, so the information came in very late. So the quality at the moment really isn't very good from governments. The widespread move towards international public sector accounting standards is a really good sign, and that suggests that around the world governments are starting to recognise the importance of this. And unquestionably, the sovereign debt crisis was part of the reason for that. I think the fact that with the sovereign debt crisis, people no longer assume that government debt is risk-free, and if they no longer assume it's risk-free, they actually want some information about the government, so they want to be able to see the balance sheet, and that's what international public sector accounting standards would give them.